So I've been using this series to talk to people who might be in a similar space as me, people who want to put out books or who have put out books on a budget. And one of the ways that I talked about doing that was finding a community and leveraging the skills of the people in that community to help you put out your work, to help you edit your work, to help you market your work, and everything that surrounds releasing a book. Now, this is a tricky situation because one of the things that I don't like about the writing world in general is there is a lot of elitism, there's a lot of classism, and I want to do something a little bit different for this video and reference a conversation that I witnessed about a year ago with Ta-Nehisi Coates and Walter Mosley. So in October 2023, Howard was doing like a writers expo type of thing, and Ta-Nehisi Coates and Walter Mosley were talking about institution building. And one of the things that they spent a lot of time talking about is why it's important for Black people to set up their own institutions for writing, because we haven't always gotten access in the white spaces. And they went through some of the history of their own personal work in institution building. Walter Mosley talked about some of the things that he was able to create to benefit some other Black creatives. If you want to see it, I'll put the link to the full video in the description box below. So a bulk of the conversation, they were talking about institution building, and more specifically institutions for Black writers. That's something that I think is really important. A lot of the people who talk about building institutions or building communities are only talking about a specific set of people who are deemed kind of like the right kinds of people. And my issue with doing this as Black people is we look at these other spaces, these white dominated spaces, and we don't really like how we're being represented or underrepresented in those spaces. So when we get the opportunity to build our own institutions, I think it's a big misstep to ignore the Black people who might not have the same access to education or finances that some other people might have. So I want to play the clip, see what you all think about it.
And one of the things that I actually wanted to ask, because you all were talking about institutions, I think I kind of came at a great time. How important is mastery for you all in terms of the works that are produced by the institutions that we might have and establish? And I ask that because in being at Howard, being in some of the educational spaces I was able to participate in, I never really found like the spaces catered to or were very open to people who came from like where I came from. And I grew up around a lot of people. I've been in the trenches. I've been in these spaces. Even now, I still do work in the city and working with people who live and exist in the conditions that oftentimes people write about, but they might not have similar lived experiences, and some of the things that they might even write miss some of the nuance that you might get from being in those lived experiences, or at least having a real connection to people who come from that. But also in trying to establish my own publishing company, I do think about the necessity to write every day and to have a certain level of mastery over just the conventions of storytelling and everything that is related to writing. But I don't want to ostracize people who might come from where I come from, who might not have the training, that might not see the resources to develop the techniques that are available and feel like, you know what, I'm just not going to put out my story because, or I'm not even going to make the attempt to be a part of this because I'm not as technically savvy as the people in this space. And the people who are in this space don't often come to where I am and meet me where the people who are like me are.
I'm happy to answer.
No, you
I mean, I can answer too. You know? I think mastery is very important. But go ahead, and I can talk about that.
Yeah, no. It's you know, it's hard. You know, I mean, you can't, you know, blame a young Black man for being raised in Beverly Hills. You know, but he's still Black. He still has parents. You know, and you know, grandparents and history and you know all that other stuff. You know. I keep thinking of a time. There's a writer, a Jamaican. I think he's from Jamaica. If not there, very near. And he's named Kelvin James. Kelvin's a little dude, but he's Jamaican, you know. So he's ready to fight, you know. And he was, you know, he's I don't know 5'8", really well built. But there was another guy who was like tall as him, you know, but he had big old muscles and shit. And they're on a thing, you know. And so this guy's talking, and he said, well, you know, I write my shit, and white people don't want to publish it because it's too black. And he's very dark skinned. Kelvin was not. And everybody, was kind of agreeing with him because he was so big. But Kelvin, he doesn't pay attention to things like that. And he turned to him and he said, well, maybe they're not publishing you because your shit ain't no good. And it was the most wonderful moment. Because he said, what? And he said, you heard me, man. I said, maybe your shit ain't no good. And it was such a wonderful interaction. Because, this guy's weakness was people were afraid of him. But that didn't mean that he was a good writer. That just meant that they were afraid of him. And Kelvin was completely happy to inform him that maybe, you need to look at your own self. And I think that those kinds of, conflicts and dialogues are incredibly important. But it's never going to be perfect. And you never want to use the argument, well, because you ain't never lived down in the hood, you can't write this shit. You can't do that. Because what it does, again, it's starting to, isolate us from each other, and so that, that's how I respond to that. You write what you write, and we'll look at it and we'll see, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't work, we'll explain why, and we'll go on from there. But of course, as Ta-Nehisi says, mastery is important, but mastery is, always a level. I just want to say, my least masterful book is Devil in a Blue Dress. Least. First book I published, least masterful. But it's as good as any other book I ever wrote. And because there's a heart there that worked. There was a love there that I had that wasn't going to go away. And so, yes, you can get lost. Really, all you have to do is go to one of these white universities and talk about mastery and writing poetry and all this shit, and they will, they will, squash you. They will squash you, saying, well, you're not like Shakespeare. And I said, man, who cares if I'm not like Shakespeare? I'm writing poems. This is a sonnet. Maybe it doesn't quite work, but what's good about it? And that's what, I'm not sure if it's completely an answer to your question, but it's partially.
I don't want to, because I kind of was a little snide about it, but I didn't mean to be snide about that mastery answer, and I don't want you to take it like that. I do think mastery is very important, but I think the question you have to ask, and I'm glad you actually asked Walter, because I think he's a great example, is mastery for what and of what. And so there are people in this world that believe, and this is just my personal theory, it might even be people in this room that disagree with me. There are people in this world that believe great novels are incomprehensible. That the inability to penetrate is actually, you know what I'm saying? And I have a different theory, and I actually think Walter's work is emblematic of it. I could be doing anything. You know what I'm saying? I could be at home on my PS5. You know what I mean? I could be having dinner with my wife. I could be watching Netflix, you know what I mean? I could be working out, I could be doing anything. You owe me something as a writer. And what you owe me is to use your skills to keep me engaged and not make me feel like I'm wasting my time. So for me, mastery is clarity. It's the ability to write clean, the ability to you read something. That's what I called my dad halfway through that. And I said, Dad, Walter writes so clear. It's so funny. God, this is so embarrassing. For another book I'm working on, I was reading Gone with the Wind. And I was I gotta take a break from this shit. It's every page is racist. But not only is every page racist, I was I'm gonna chronicle every instance of racism. And I was man, you can't do that. You won't finish. You know what I mean? But also it was it was so dense. You know what I mean? I'm going through and I'm oh, scholar did this. I don't care. You know what I mean? And then I read Walter was the dude's I woke up and then this happened. And I was okay, I'm with you. You know what I mean? And so I think mastery for clarity. Clarity is really important. You know what I mean? I think that's really, really, not mastery for how many big words I can use, not mastery for how intelligent I can make people, think I am, but mastery for clarity. Does that make sense? Like where it's clean, you know what I mean? Where you can understand.
Yeah, that was the answer I came up with too, but I just wanted to see what you all thought.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add one thing. You know, come on up. I just want to say, you know, like a lot of people, like you could read Finnegan's Wake, you know, by Joyce. You know, it's impossible to read. There's like 6 people in the world that can read it, you know. And there are other Irish, you know, Flann O'Brien, for instance, is a writer just like him, but writes very clearly. They write exactly the same. It's very interesting. You ever read Flann O'Brien? Oh yeah, The Third Policeman. But you know, but one thing that people forget, and I think this is, I mean, this is just to you, but you know, other people too. Almost every successful book, novel in literature was originally a popular piece of fiction. It was a story that people wanted to read because they were having a good time. Shakespeare, all of Shakespeare is like that. You know, Herman Melville is like that. Gogol is like that. You know, Langston Hughes is like that. You know, I mean, you read the simple stories, man. It's like, come on. You know, yeah, I know that guy. You know, shit. You know, it's that thing, the job is to educate secretly, but outwardly make sure that people want to read to the end. You know, yeah.
I mean, it's a nasty word, but like entertaining is actually part of it.
Oh, it has to be.
Like it's part of it.
It has to be.
The thing that kind of threw me off about this interaction was I felt like Mr. Mosley was kind of mocking me at a certain point. And I don't know, maybe I could have just been being sensitive, but you saw the clip. What do you all think? Put it in the comments. When he tells the story about the Jamaican going to the person like, you know, well, your shit just ain't that good. And he brings up this point about, well, you can't fault a black person for being born in Beverly Hills. And my problem isn't I'm trying to fault anybody who's born in affluent circumstances. But my issue is we oftentimes build these institutions that cater to those people and give them an opportunity to write and talk about stories that affect other people who are actually alive. I don't think you have to be from somewhere or know everything about a particular circumstance that you want to write about, but I do think it's fair and it makes sense that we want to educate and teach the people who might come from some of those circumstances how to write their own stories, how to take agency over their own narratives if we're going to give people who don't come from that the same ability. And I understand that because people might lack education, people might lack finances and certain things like that, they might not be able to pay for the same amount of training, or they may not be as technically savvy as some of these people who might have grown up in the Beverly Hills of the world. But if we're really talking about building institutions for our people, I think that we do have to give a little bit more than people might be able to afford or even deserve at some points. And Mr. Coates even has a quote to this when he's talking at certain points during the lecture where he says something like, if we build everybody together, then great things can happen. And I do believe that, but we have to make sure that everybody includes more than just the smarticle particle people with degrees and who goes to these HBCUs or even sometimes PWIs. It also has to include the people from the hood, the uneducated, our more country people, because they have stories that are valuable too. With the proper amount of guidance and community and using the Walter Mosleys of the world, using the Ta-Nehisi Coates of the world, they can also be New York Times bestsellers and they could also make groundbreaking work. One of the most important points that got brought up during the conversation, Mr. Mosley, I think, made it himself, where he says something like, we can't do everything, but we have to do what we can because it makes a difference. And I absolutely agree with that. But I also think it's important to be mindful of how we talk and the things that we say about the people in our community, whether we acknowledge them as our community or not. Because these gentlemen are giants in the space. And for me, just being on the other side of the comment, like I said, I kind of felt like he was playing with me and that set me off. I understand that resilience is a super important part of doing anything creative. And if you allow like one comment to knock you off your pivot, you'll have a rough time. And you're probably not going to have success anyway if you can't take some criticism. But I also think it's important to note that for the stature that these men have in this space as black men, as black writers, and all of the work that they've done, I mean, way more than I have ever done and maybe way more than I'll ever do. I also think it's important to be mindful of how some of the things you say can be off-putting or can stifle the next generation of creative people. Somebody who is really passionate about writing and wanted to take it serious and jump into the space, hearing that might feel like, oh man, if I'm one of those people who fall into, I'm just not that good, or just because I come from the hood, I don't really know anything, I can't really write it a certain type of way, they might want to fall back at that point. And that does the opposite of what community is supposed to do, which is pull us up. If we really care about creating institutions for black people, creating a community for the next generation of black writers, we're going to have to accept some of the people who we might deem as lesser or just not as good. But let's be honest, if it was really all about being good in order to be a writer, self-help wouldn't be dominating the way that it is.